The main facts in Cusco, there's in the whole mission, it's over 4 departments, is what they call them, like Cusco, Puno, Apurimac, and Madre de Dios. And those are like the 4 departments, 4 states basically. And what's really cool about that is it's so diverse. Like you have the jungle in one of those departments. It's so hot and humid. And then you have Cusco, which is like really high, just super dry and really high altitude. And then in Puno, it's super cold and it's flat. It's flat as can be. It's super low. And so there's a lot of diversity within my mission itself, just changing from one area to the next. And within those 4 areas, there's 7 stakes. As of now, at least when I was there's 7 stakes, and they're progressing towards an 8th. But when I was there last, they were working really hard on strengthening the stakes and not so much on the districts. And so they're putting a lot of missionaries in the stakes. Other than that, in my mission, like something unique about it, obviously it's Machu Picchu, Lago Titicaca, or Lake Titicaca. So like church attendance in the wards, like the highest there was in the wards is about 200. And it ranges from 200 to about 100 in the wards. And then in the branches, it ranges from like small family groups with 20 people to like 80 or 90 in the branches. So it covers about that whole range. The most is about 200 in a big ward there. Any correlations between Book of Mormon? People would always talk about that in my mission. They'd talk about how, oh yeah, the Book of Mormon, like this happened here or whatnot. Like there was some members in Cusco that were, like everyone in Cusco is really into tourism. That's what they really work in. So there's a few tour guides in our wards or whatnot, and they'd go to Machu Picchu, and they'd always come back and tell us like, oh, we saw this baptismal font in Machu Picchu. Like, we'll show you where it's at. Or they'd show us different stuff. Like, oh, Machu Picchu, like, has a relation to the Book of Mormon in this sense. So they'd talk about, like, all the ruins there. Because in Cusco, there's a ton of Incan ruins like that. Not just Machu Picchu. But they'd always find different things, like baptismal fonts or stuff like that, that they would relate to the Book of Mormon. And I don't know how much of it's true, but they'd always connect it to the Book of Mormon like that. Just off all the ruins. One of the most common misconceptions is definitely they think that every one of us has multiple wives. So they'd always ask that. But they'd always ask that, and there'd be like, sometimes there'd be articles in the newspaper, be like, Joseph Smith had such and such of many wives. Or like there was a lot of stuff like that. I was surprised. Because you never really see that in the States here. But they talk about that a lot in Peru, is about polygamy. And so we ran into that quite a few times. Other than that, any common misconceptions? Sometimes they'd think it was weird that we would go around as 2 male missionaries because they're like, oh yeah, since you guys are, I guess, you don't believe in gay marriage, why do you always walk around as 2 missionaries? Why do you live together? And they'd always ask us about that too. And with the sisters as well. And it was really weird. They'd always ask us, like, do you guys sleep in the same bed and stuff like this? They'd ask us really weird questions. And so that was the other misconception. Other than that, I think it was pretty normal. The most common challenges is by far marriage, because most people there, they'll live together for, I don't know how many years, a long time. By the time they live together for like 30 years, and they'll decide, all right, might as well get married now. And so it takes a long time for them to get married. Like when you ask them if they want to get married, they're like, well, we've only been together for like 5 years, so that's not enough time to know if we're going to get married or not. And that was one of the really hardest challenges. The other one would probably be drinking. Everyone there loves to drink. It's a really social thing. Even if you don't like get drunk or anything, they'll always go. There'll always be beer somewhere. When you go just visit family or visit friends, they'll always be drinking. Like it doesn't mean, not a lot, but they'll drink at least some. And that's just so cultural there. Like if you don't drink, then they're like, they'll make fun of you really a lot. And it's just really hard not to drink and live in that culture. Another thing against the word wisdom they'd use is coca. I don't know exactly what it is in English, I can't remember. But it's a leaf that they use to make cocaine. And so they just chew that leaf because it gives them energy. It doesn't make them, they don't have to eat, they don't have to drink if they're chewing that leaf, so they can work all day and not have to stop for eating and drinking. And so we would teach that as against the word of wisdom as well, because it's like an addictive substance, like a drug. And so people use that a lot as well. It's the coca leaf, I guess, what they use to make cocaine. I think that's the only other problem they really have. No one there really smokes, so there's no problem with smoking. Never really ran into anyone that smoked. I hardly ever do that. There wasn't really many actual drug addictions that I ran into. It was pretty calm, but they always use that leaf. That's about it. I served in Kurawasi, which is a small town in the department of Apurimac. That's where I started. A little tiny town, maybe 1,000 people live there. And so there's me, just a few missionaries. And then I served in Cusco, like actual Cusco. And I was in the office for that time, so serving with the president. And that was a really awesome experience. Get to know all of Cusco that way. And then the next area I served in was Escuchaca, which is another small town outside of Cusco, like an hour and a half outside of Cusco. After that, I went to Andahuaylas, which is about 12 hours away from Cusco. That's about the furthest point you could get, 12 hours by bus. And it's a bigger town, smaller than Cusco, for sure. And then I went to Ayaviri, which is in the Puno region, and another small town of about 2,000, 3,000 people. And then lastly, I served in Abancay, which is probably the third biggest city, or fourth in my mission. And that was the last place I served, was in Abancay. And so basically out of all my areas, half of them were tiny little pueblos, tiny little towns, and the other half were big cities. And I always ran into that problem in the small towns. There's a lot, like those rumors that we talked about earlier, they'd get really spread about, and it's really hard to get in there and kind of fix those rumors. And so it's really hard to have success in the smaller areas. But in the bigger cities, like, people were more open to change. And so I saw that in my mission. It was a lot easier to help them convert to the gospel in the bigger cities. Well, like at Machu Picchu, there's one place, because I went with my stake president at that time. He went with us to Machu Picchu and I went. And I remember there's one big open area in Machu Picchu, and you talk from the top. You stand on this ledge up here, and there's this big open area below. And when you talk from this point, like, it echoes over the whole grassy area. You could hear him at the very edge, like, easily. And so, like, he would say, like, oh, this is where they had, like, general conference. This is where they gave their talks from. And so, like, stuff like that, where they'd have places to give talks. Or I think besides that, it was just the baptismal fonts, but they'd have little coincidences like that, yeah.